Open your Bibles to John chapter 2. John chapter 2 is where we will read. We're actually beginning a new series today called Signs, Miracles in John's Gospel. There are 7 miracles in the first half of John's Gospel that John does not call miracles, he calls them signs. 7 signs. He calls them signs because the miracles mean something. They point to something, like a sign on a roadside that tells you where you're headed or the destination. The sign points to something. It gives you some information or reveals something that's coming. And over the next several weeks in the lead up to Easter, we're going to look at what the miracles of Jesus mean. And we'll see again and again why John refers to them as signs, because they reveal who Jesus is. And we begin with one of the most well-known miracles that Jesus ever performed. It is, as John tells us, the first of all the signs that Jesus performed. The first miracle. It takes place at a wedding in a little town called Cana, where Jesus turns water into wine. Now, even people who don't know anything about the Bible, even people who don't know anything about Jesus, know something about Jesus turning water into wine, don't they? This has kind of become common knowledge, just common cultural knowledge that Jesus turns water to wine. Somewhere, at some point, we know water became wine in Jesus' ministry. In fact, it's become kind of a cultural meme, so to speak, right? I found one of these pictures on the internet. I thought this was really funny. I wanted to show it to you. It's a shelf of wine, but you see the sign above it? Water, right? And it says Jesus was here. Somebody turned this shelf in Walmart. There's no water here, it's all wine. Somebody changed this. Jesus was here. Thought that was good. But when we come to the water, changing the water to wine in John chapter 2, we're all of a sudden confronted with something that we generally know about. You know, it's generally known, water to wine, okay. But now we come to the fact of it happening in a certain town at a certain time during a certain wedding. And what you can't deny when faced with the miracles of Jesus is that they often divide people into groups of those who accept the reality of the miracle and what it means, and those who refuse to accept either the miracle itself or the implication of it. When you come to a story like this, in fact, when you just come to the miracles as a whole, we're going to talk about miracles for several weeks, but when you come to talk about miracles, you put people in camps who maybe are skeptical of miracles. Maybe you're in the camp of those who immediately have doubts about anything miraculous ever happening. Interestingly, the crowds and the religious leaders in Jesus' day never actually debated whether Jesus had performed miracles or not. What they debated, they couldn't very well debate that with there were people who saw him do certain things and eyewitnesses standing around. But what they refused to accept was the implication of the miracles. And instead, on a couple of occasions, they accused Jesus of performing the miracles, but by a different power, by Satan's power rather than God's power. So what was up for debate in Jesus' day was not necessarily whether he did miracles, but by what power, by whose authority he was doing the miracles, what the miracles meant and what they pointed to. For us, however, that is rarely the question that we are asking, because we stand in the modern age with a scientific worldview. And anytime you come to like a series on miracles, something that smacks of the miraculous, we kind of view it with skepticism by default in our world, rightfully so. If you've seen modern day, claims, miracle workers, spiritual healers getting rich on what would seem to be some false claims of miracles in some places. We've seen some abuses, we've seen that, and so we're skeptical of that. And also we're skeptical just on scientific grounds, because we're scientifically minded modern people. And I get that too. But a greater scientific knowledge of the laws of nature does not mean what some people suppose that it means. It doesn't exclude miracles. It doesn't preclude miracles. So in this series, as we approach the miracles of Jesus, we're not throwing all scientific knowledge out the window. In fact, knowledge and reason does not lead us to conclude that nature is all there is. In fact, it leads us to the opposite conclusion. Did you know that? We have gained lots of knowledge, lots of information, knowledge about the total interlocking cause and effect system of nature. You put these chemicals together and you get X. You put this into the system, you get this out of the system. We have lots of knowledge and inferences and deductions about this system. Knowledge and truth, though, those things are not objects made out of matter. Do you know that? So all of our knowledge, all of our inferences, all of our reason, that is not made of matter. That is not part of the structure of nature. That inferences are logical structures. It's not made of atoms. That's why we can learn something and learn whether it's true or not. The fact is, if all of our scientific inferences were just the random results of atoms crashing together, just a part of the cause and effect of nature, you wouldn't be able to trust whether your reasoning was true or not. It would just be cause and effect, atoms bumping into each other, a part of the system of nature. But we do know that our reasoning can find truth. We trust our reasoning every day to show us what's true about the world. We know it is. Which means that the fundamental reality is not just atoms and natural laws. The fundamental reality is mind and reason. There is a cause behind nature. Nature is the result of a mind. And a miracle then would just be a kind of interference in nature by that mind which is outside of nature and was the cause of nature. So the laws of nature are never broken in Jesus' miracles. Jesus turns water to wine, and the miraculous wine obeys all the laws of nature. If God creates or deflects or transforms a unit of matter, immediately nature takes over and conforms it to all of her laws. Laws of nature never cause anything. They simply tell you what will happen once something new is introduced. So that's what a miracle is. It's an interference in nature by a cause outside of nature, a mind outside of nature, a person outside of nature. So a miracle, as C.S. Lewis puts it, is not a matter of suspending the pattern of nature, but rather of feeding new events into that pattern. And in that sense, we can say everything is not a miracle, and that's important to say when we come to the miracles of Jesus. There is a way of seeing miracles in the everyday. That's not a bad thing. Okay, in the ways that God works things together in our lives, the way that God speaks and acts in our lives, in the birth of a child, in the healing of the human body. I think that's fine, and it's a way of tracing everything back to the goodness, the activity of God. We'll call those miracles of the everyday. Those are beautiful things. But when it comes to the miracles of Jesus, we want to be able to say, to differentiate those and say these are interruptions in nature for a purpose, a sign that shows us something, that shows us that it's not just a random interference in nature, but that there's a purpose outside of us that is coming to invade our world, so to speak. It's that kind of miracle. God turns water into wine every year through natural processes. Did you know that? Because God created plant enzymes that turn water and soil and sunlight into a juice that will become wine. So God is constantly turning water into wine, and we might say there's something miraculous about that process. But one time, in a place called Cana in Galilee, at a wedding with some friends, one time and one time only, God incarnate short-circuited that natural process and makes wine in an instant. And that is, according to our definition, a miracle, an interference in the natural process. So let us turn to the story of how this happens in Cana in Galilee. John chapter 2, verse 1. It says, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. I think she's like whispering this to him at some point because they're trying to, there's like behind the scenes, oh no, the caterers are out of wine. Woman, why do you involve me? This is not rude for Jesus to call his mother woman. It's like madam, or you could translate it dear woman. Some translations do. So, madam, why do you involve me? Dear woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The setting of this story is social embarrassment at a wedding. The wine shouldn't have run out. It shouldn't have been gone. They should have had enough. And yet, they run out of wine. We're not told why the wine was gone. It's not important, so you don't waste your time trying to figure out why the wine is gone. That's not the point of the sign. This is also not a story about whether you should or should not drink wine. It's not a story about that. So set that aside, okay? This is not a story about whether you should or shouldn't. That's not the point of the story or the point of the miracle. Instead, imagine this. Imagine you're giving a wedding for your son or your daughter. You're having a lovely reception dinner, and the caterers are serving the dinner, something nice, you know. You got a salmon, a choice of a salmon or a Cornish game hen, let's say, and they've got this many salmon and this many Cornish game hens, you know, and imagine they're serving dinner to all the guests, and everyone's having a wonderful time and talking and celebrating, and they've got about 5 tables over here left, and they run out of food. And the caterer comes and says, we got 30 or 40 people, and we don't have food for them. Now, this would be embarrassing. You got 30 or 40 guests that you don't have a meal for at the wedding that you invited them to. This would be embarrassing. And this is what's going on, only on an even deeper level, because the shame in an ancient Near Eastern culture like this, first century Jewish culture, the shame would have cast a pall over the whole celebration. I mean, you know, nowadays you could laugh about it, order Chipotle to go or something and, you know, get some food in there. But back then it wasn't like that. This would have dishonored the family and would have kind of put a damper on the whole celebration. Weddings were big deals, big community events in first century Jewish culture. I mean, what happened was when the groom's house was all prepared, okay, the groom would get his house prepared for the wedding, for the bride to come. And the groom would then send his friend, the friend of the groom, the best man, would travel in a procession through the village to go and get the bride and then bring the bride into the home of the groom, symbolically. Like that's what the marriage is about. The bride is coming to live in the groom's home, and they're gonna be together. And then they have an open house for a week. Now, this is not the kind of, you know, honeymooners want to spend their first week of marriage. That's not how you imagined your first week of marriage, right? But there you go. The groom just throws an open house, and the whole village can come and go and eat and celebrate, and, you know, up to a week. And Jesus was happy to show up and celebrate this wedding. We figure it seems like they're friends, you know, Jesus' mother's invited and Jesus is invited with some of his disciples. So this is either friends or relatives, people that they knew in Galilee, maybe people that Jesus had grown up with, or we don't know if it's a relative of Mary's or something like that. We're not sure, but they were happy to go and be a part of the celebration. Jesus was not a grumpy person, okay? Jesus was not a monk. He was not austere. He wasn't sequestered from social gatherings. He was celebrating happily, joyously, the wedding. It was a community event, you know. And then Mary comes to him, And John never calls her Mary, by the way. He just she's always referred in this gospel, she's always referred to as Jesus' mother, which was probably a sign of respect, like calling someone Mrs. Smith instead of by their first name. Only you couldn't call her like Mrs. Nazareth. It didn't work like that. Now, we don't know why Mary comes to him because, we don't know her connection to the people. Like, why did Mary feel like she needed to do something about the wine? We don't know. Maybe they were relatives or close friends, but whatever the case, the situation's desperate and she's trying to solve it behind the scenes. But here's the deal. Jesus had not performed any miracles yet. He responds to her, "Dear woman, why have you involved me? My hour has not yet come." And what's he talking about, my hour? Is it just like my time to start doing miracles hasn't come yet? Well, it's not quite that. It's a little more than that. In John's gospel, this phrase occurs several times, my hour has not yet come. And when Jesus talks about his hour coming, he's not just talking about the time of his public ministry. It's not just that, because later during his public ministry, Jesus actually says, my time still hasn't come. And he's doing miracles and things like that. So what is that hour? What is that time? And when the Jewish leaders try to lay hands on Jesus later in the gospel, it says they couldn't lay a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. So what is this? Well, Jesus only says that his hour is at hand when he's about to be arrested and crucified. So clearly his hour has something to do with his death, with Jesus' death. He knows even now what the beginning of his ministry would lead to. The first miracle would set in motion the public ministry that would eventually lead to his death. And this is a way of telling his mother, listen, my concerns aren't purely human concerns. I've got a timetable, and this is difficult because you imagine Jesus wants to help. You would imagine, yeah, okay, he's at this wedding. He wants to help. He wants to help his mom do what his mom is asking him to do. In fact, it's interesting that he never says, okay, I'll do it. And she still says to the people, do whatever he tells you to do. Do you see that? I mean, he says it's like he's refusing, and then she says to the servants, do whatever he tells you to do, which, by the way, is the only command that we have from Mary. Do whatever Jesus tells you to do. That's the only command we have from Jesus' mother. Isn't that cool? And I don't know why she goes ahead and tells the servants, do whatever he tells you to do, when Jesus hasn't agreed to do anything, he hasn't agreed to do a miracle. But I imagine that there's something between mother and son there. And he says, Mom, my hour has not yet come. And she gives him the look. And he looks back and goes, and then she turns to the servants and says, do what he tells you to do. But his point is, I can't make this decision based solely on some human agenda or human advice or, as much as I think Jesus cared about sparing this person from embarrassment, he was communicating by saying his hour had not yet come, that this miracle was not just about sparing someone from social shame. There was a greater plan to consider that ultimately leads to the cross where no one would expect. And what's sort of puzzling is that Jesus seems to be refusing and then performs the miracle anyway. And what I think John wants us to understand is that Jesus is aware of the timeline of his Father's plan. But he's gonna perform the miracle in a way that both points to his true mission, but also he's gonna do it without drawing undue attention to himself. You notice this is not one of the miracles that everybody sees and knows Jesus did it, and it's like, the blind man, in John 9, everybody, hears about Jesus healing the blind man. Well, this is not like that. He's gonna do this behind the scenes. He knows his hour has not yet come. He's going to perform a sign that points to who he is, but do it in a way that doesn't jumpstart his or put an early start into his ministry that shouldn't be there, right? And this is what happens because, hey, nobody knows, it seems, or not everyone knows, who provides the wine. He does it discreetly. We don't even really know in the text, where does the miracle happen? Do you know where it happens? I don't know where it happens. When they fill the jars, or when they draw it out, or when they're taking it, when the man drinks it? I mean, when does the water become wine? I mean, it seems to happen after they draw it out, because it says only the servants who drew, when they drew the water out, it says they're drawing water. I don't know. Maybe it happens on the way to giving it to the master of the banquet, in which case there's a little bit of faith involved for the servants who have to carry it, right? We're not told. We just know that Jesus provides the wine, and we're told that he uses these huge jars to do it. The jars are important. It's a detail, these 6 stone water jars. John makes sure that we have this detail where these were used for Jewish ritual purification. Now, these were not clay pots. Don't think about a clay pot here that you could smash or something. No. These were stone, like a limestone, like a huge jars that were cut from a single piece of limestone. Jars that big seem to become more common only after the Romans are there, because they have these huge lathes for these stones to build cylindrical stone columns, right? So this little detail fits with what we know of the first century time period. But these huge stone jars, the reason they were used for purification is because, according to Leviticus, water in a cistern, which the stone jar kind of counted as that, water in a cistern remained pure for longer than other vessels under certain circumstances. So not everyone would have something like this. It would be someone who had a need for ritual purity more often, like a priestly family, something like that. But what John wants us to see is that these jars represent the constant need for ritual cleansing with water in the Old Covenant. And this sign, changing the water to wine, points to the fact that the new covenant would be sealed with something else: Jesus' blood. So then at the end of the parable, when the servants take the wine to the master of the banquet, and he's so impressed with the quality of the wine, the valuable, lovely, good tasting wine. There's something more precious about this wine. See, there's like a clue to Jesus' blood here. But he's so impressed with the quality of the wine, he pulls the bridegroom aside and says, "You have saved the best for last. You saved the best." And he doesn't know that the bridegroom didn't provide the wine. He doesn't know that. He thinks the bridegroom did. Now, why would John include this detail about the master of the banquet saying this to the bridegroom, especially when John knows, the bridegroom's not the one who actually provided the wine? We can see that John is playing with a little bit of irony here, because the master of the banquet doesn't know where the wine came from, but he assumes that it came from the bridegroom. That's who's supposed to provide this kind of thing. But what if that is precisely John's point? What if the irony is that the bridegroom really did provide the wine, because the true bridegroom is Jesus? Think about it. Jesus takes the place of the bridegroom by providing the wine, and there's something hugely significant about this for John. In many ways, this is the point to which John has been writing this story. The story ends with this ironic statement. And then John says, this is the first sign that revealed Jesus' glory. Remember, for John, there is no question of random miracles popping up. The point of this miracle is to reveal something about Jesus' identity, who Jesus really is. And I know we don't really have a category for this, but all throughout the Old Testament, the covenant between God and his people is compared to a marriage covenant. That Israel was like a young bride in the wilderness, that Yahweh wooed in the wilderness when they first pledged their devotion to Yahweh. This is how Jeremiah talks about the covenant. The whole book of Hosea is basically saying that the sin of Israel is like adultery in a marriage. And if you turn to the end of the Bible in Revelation 19, what's it end with? A wedding. Rejoice and be glad, for the wedding of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Revelation 19:7. And not only this, but if you turn to the next chapter in John and keep reading closer to the event, in John 3, verse 29, John the Baptist is being asked about his disciples leaving him to follow Jesus. He's being asked whether this upsets him. Are you upset that your disciples are now leaving you and following Jesus? People are asking. Don't you care if all your disciples are following this other guy? And John's response is a little bit bizarre. It's a little bit puzzling. Listen to what John the Baptist says. Verse 29, chapter 3. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. Look, there it is. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. He must become greater. I must become less. What's that mean when John says the bride belongs to the bridegroom? Who is the bride? I mean, he's answering a question about his disciples who are leaving him to follow Jesus, and he's saying, yeah, the bride belongs with the bridegroom. My disciples, yes, my disciples are leaving me to follow Jesus, but my disciples, the people of Israel, are the bride, and the bride belongs with the bridegroom. So I'm not sad about them following Jesus now, because at a wedding, the friend of the bridegroom isn't sad. He's full of joy when he hears the time has come. And remember, at a Jewish wedding, what was the job of the best man? To bring the bride to the groom. John the Baptist is saying, this was my job all along, to bring the bride back to the groom. So why would I be upset if they're following the groom? The bride belongs with the groom. My joy is complete. He must increase, I must decrease. This wedding is not about me. It's about the bride coming back to the bridegroom. It is no accident that Jesus chose a wedding for his first miracle. The divine bridegroom of Israel had come in the flesh to fulfill the prophecies of a new marriage covenant. The abundant wine is a picture of what would seal this new covenant, Jesus' blood. Instead of the water that symbolized the purification of the old covenant, Jesus chose wine to symbolize the new covenant in his blood. But you know, the wine is also a symbol of abundance and joy and celebration. That was a foretaste of the final wedding of the Lamb at the end of history. So this is, in other words, the perfect miracle for the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Which is why for John, it's not just a miracle, it's a sign. It's not an issue of believing or disbelieving some random historical event. This is not the kind of thing that some miracle worker somewhere did to impress people. Jesus, through this miracle, sheds light on the rest of the story. Jesus makes sense of the rest of the story. Jesus makes the rest of the story make sense. This miracle fits as the kind of missing puzzle piece that ties together one thread of the whole story, that one way to tell the story of God and humanity from beginning to end is as a divine love story. That maybe the fundamental reality is not just reason and mind, it is love. A God who is love from the very beginning, who creates out of love. A story in which God never stops pursuing his love, his people. And in that story, we are the bride that has betrayed the God who loved us and made us. And in that story, we have chased other loves. We have ignored and spurned the advances of the very one who came to save us, to heal our brokenness, to bring us back to himself. But you see, this always had to be a possibility. In a love story, if the story that we're in is a love story, then there had to be the possibility for love to be rejected in order for love to be real. It must be chosen willingly. God didn't create puppets to do his will without question. And so the long history of pain and brokenness in the world was not a defeat of God's love. It was because we are free to reject his love or accept his love. But our rejection was the backdrop against which the patient and merciful love of the bridegroom would shine all the brighter. Because now we know what love is. Because he first loved us, even while we were still sinners. God demonstrated his love for us. Now we know, we can see what love is all the more clearly because of our rebellion. It shines a spotlight on the majesty of his love. His mercy pursued us all the way to the cross. Love paid the price for our sin, and love was stronger than the grave. As Paul said in Ephesians 5, Christ loved the church, gave himself up for her to make her holy and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or blemish. Paul says it's a mystery. Marriage, this whole thing's a mystery, but it points to Christ and his church. It's the opposite of the image from the prophet Hosea. Once we were like harlots, now we're prepared for the bridegroom like an untouched bride, made clean, pure, holy for him. But it's not the end of the story yet. The bridegroom has come, paid the price to cleanse the bride. We're prepared. We're made clean, ready to be presented as holy if we've accepted Christ by faith. So we've had a foretaste of the love and joy of the bridegroom, but we're still waiting for the wedding. That comes at the very end. We're waiting expectantly. The final words of the book of Revelation say, the Spirit and the bride say, come, Lord Jesus. The Spirit and the bride. That's us. At the end of the story, waiting expectantly, longing. I wonder how long it's been since you've really considered this whole story as a love story. Did you know there's a love that is pursuing you? Did you know that? Did you know that no matter who you are, the God who created you loves you, wants you to receive that love, to be cleansed of your sins, to be transformed by that love, and then to walk in the way of love so that you love as he has loved you. Today, it's not a matter of being confronted with the decision to believe or not believe whether water can be turned into wine. It's a matter of being confronted with a person who is extending his love to us. You settle the matter of who Jesus is and everything falls into place. If Jesus is the divine word made flesh, the creator entering creation, providing wine at a wedding is no problem at all. It's not a question of evaluating the miracle, it's a question of the person. Is it difficult for you to accept love you haven't earned? Is that hard? What do I do with a love story, Collin? How do I enter into a love? What do you do when you're invited to a wedding? You accept the invitation. You come to celebrate the love, the joy of the bride and the bridegroom. You get caught up in the celebration of it. A love story is kind of something that you get taken up in. To respond to a love means to respond with desire. To be with the one who wants to be in relationship with you. Is it hard to imagine that this love is available to you right now? Real enough for your life today, the needs, struggles you have? It is. You know why? Because Jesus is not dead. He is alive. And he loves you. And he is inviting you to a wedding, to be a part of a love story between God and his people, and to respond with faithfulness, obedience, and surrender to him. Because he crossed the infinite distance from heaven to earth to win back his bride. He's inviting you to respond. Let's pray.